Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Hobby Cheating Q&A live. So this is where we get together for about an hour. We do it once a month on a Saturday. This one's a little later than what I would normally do in the month, but that's just how the weekends worked out here in April. And I just realized I'm doing this show on 420. That's very funny. But anyway, what we're going to do is over in the comments, which is on one of these sides, there is a little area where you can type your questions to me and I will answer them. That's the basic concept here. If basically over the next hour, I'm here to answer any and all hobby related questions that you've got, or at least do my best. I certainly can't claim to know everything, and I will give you my best and honest answer that I can, or at least try to point you in the direction of something that's helpful. Looks like we've got a lot of people in the comments and watching right now. So as we're waiting for some questions to start, everybody probably saw I just finished up those Death Guard. They're not near me. I just realized I was going to go grab them. I'm prepping up this guy for the class I am teaching in the UK at Darksphere Games the week before Warhammer Fest. So if you want to come take that class with me, it's going to be a lot of fun. We're doing it in a later afternoon. So I'm teaching the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. We're doing a unit over the weekend and a monster on Monday and Tuesday at Darksphere. And you can find the link in the description to come check that out. It'll be a good time. Somebody asked me about why my YouTube channel contains that. I have no idea. I don't know, man. I wish I knew. I tried to change it before and it wouldn't change. So I don't know what's up with that. I asked YouTube once. I don't know. But here we are. Because YouTube is weird, I guess. So there you go. I would very much love to just have it be my name, but I tried to change it in the past and it didn't work. I don't know. I should probably do it again. Maybe things have gotten better now. They did just switch around a lot of the Creator Studio stuff. All right. So some questions. Okay. Okay, I'm not going to try to pronounce that name. Nope, not going to try it. We're just going to skip that, but I'll answer the question. As a beginner, what's the best way to highlight after doing a wash? Well, so many of us, when we start out, paint in the sort of base coat wash highlight style. The answer is a couple layers of thinner paint. My best advice would be, learn your paints, how thick they are. Every color you have, and depending on the paint line you're using, will thin differently. And you want to make sure you've got a manageable amount. Make sure you're always wicking your brush off into, a wet paper towel or something before you're touching the miniature. And then just go for use a slightly larger brush than you might initially be comfortable with. It'll help improve your brush control. And it'll be tougher at first, but in the long term, it will be very beneficial. And just do a couple of thin layers, like standard Duncan rules apply here, if that's the style you're utilizing. My advice would be, if you watch, I think somebody who does layering really, really well as a sort of style, as a main way they paint, is like Dr. Faust. So I would go, in many of his videos, he sort of explains his principles behind layering and how he does it. It's not, there are many other ways to paint. That's not the particular way I tend to do it, but there's nothing wrong with it. And so the real key is just controlled thin layers that, slowly march up a gradient. So you want to be, very carefully mixing in your highlight colors. You don't want to try to jump too far. You want to be very aware of when you're going up to a highlight color, if it has white in it, so for example, when you're highlighting with reds, it will be much more transparent and blend a lot easier, but it'll also be harder to notice the difference or to move darker undercolors. That's because there's no white. White is your opaque paint. So like highlighting blue and highlighting purple, people often have a lot of trouble with, because they just go grab like something like this, and then they can't figure out why suddenly when put over top of something like this, it sticks out so much. Well, it's because this has a ton of white in it. Right. And this is going to be extremely opaque when I look at the difference between these two. So I have to be very thin and controlled with my gradients. Whereas if I were to do the same thing with reds, if I were to jump from like here to Here on the reds, that's about a similar jump value-wise, but it would still look very smooth. So certain colors are going to be more friendly to that kind of a painting style. Okay. All right, there you go. Hope that answered that. Boom, 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 boom. Lots of questions. Okay. Martin says, for painting larger miniatures, which would facilitate painting the mini and the base separately. How do you ensure the final assembly is seamless? Like a magma dragon. Well, first of all, I paint every miniature I paint separate from the base. That's not just larger miniatures. Every model I paint is not attached to the base. Period. And so how do I make sure they go together? I mean, you kind of stick them on a base and make sure that you know where their feet are going to be is one good way, and then kind of mark it out. If you pin their feet, I'll often, like I have with this guy, I'll often just put a pin into my base. Like I'll set him down on the base after I have it how I want it before I paint him, and I'll try to like stick him in there, and then I'll use a paper clip and I'll like put the other part of a paper clip into the hole I make, so I know where it is. If it doesn't fit perfectly, if you get floating foot syndrome, just fix it. You know, take some extra like basing paste or grit or rocks or plastic putty or anything like that, whatever, something like that, or perfect putty or anything, and just push it under their feet until it's attached. Pretty straightforward. I find people, one of the things I think people often get scared of, and it's a funny thing. People often get scared of like putting a raw product like paste onto a miniature after it's done, after they've finished it. Who cares? It doesn't matter. You won't be able to tell. It's a tiny area. You just paint it. You don't need to reprime it. Who cares? Paint will go perfectly fine over it. And then you just work it in. It takes probably 5 minutes. The Death Guard I did earlier today, I realized in looking at the Lord of Death, who was, more or less completely finished, I realized he had this giant gap on his shoulder that I had missed before. Just because I wasn't really painting it for competition originally. So I just took some perfect putty and put it on there, shaped it out, grabbed my tools, and made that thing look like chainmail. And suddenly my fully painted competition miniature had this big splotch of white putty. I painted it. It took 15 minutes. And you cannot tell the difference anymore, because then you won't be able to after it's done. So there you go. A little bit of prior planning can prevent poor performance, but also in the end, it doesn't matter. You can always fix it. Okay. Ben says, other than color range, what are the many differences between Vallejo game color and model color? Not much. They're basically the same paint. Like there's a slight formulation difference, but for our purposes, nothing. The game color obviously has a brighter line to it. It's meant to be more fantasy-based colors. There is a slight chemical difference in some of the mixes, in the use of how they mixed it, but it's so minor as to be more or less irrelevant to the vast majority of painters. So my answer would be basically nothing for all purposes, unless you're really, really curious at a scientific level, because they use a slightly different additive mix in game color. But other than that, nothing. Yeah, and somebody answered it and said, yeah, the reason, you're right, they do, that creamier sense you're getting is because of that different additive mix. I mean, they still have the same medium, right? Like paint is 3 things core: pigment, a bonding agent, and a solvent. All paint is that. Okay. And your pigment is pigment. Your bonding agent is, depends on the type of paint you're using. In this case, we're using acrylic paint, so the bonding agent is acrylic medium. Okay. But if you're using oil paints, it's a type of oil, and so on. So if you're using alcohol-based paints, it's alcohol. And then you have a solvent, right? And solvent in the case of acrylic paint is water. So but then there are additives. This is sort of 4th element that ends up being in paints. Additives that like help improve flow or slow drying time or do a lot of different chemical functions. But as I said, they have a slightly different mix. Okay. I'm gonna pronounce that as Chaser, but X Hazer. but I assume it's Chaser. Anyways, if you had to choose just one paint set to paint with, what brand would it be? I had to gun to my head. If I had to choose just one, I don't know, man. That's a tough question. I have a lot of paint. And I like elements of all of the paints. If I had to choose just one, I'd probably scale 75, just because they happen to align well with my style. But I mean, on any given day, I have a pretty good mix of paints in front of me. Right now, on my desk in front of me, I have Pro Acryl and Vallejo and Watercolors and Citadel and Secret Weapon. And that's out of a total of about 10 paints. So, you know, that should kind of tell you where I'm at. But sure, gun to my head, that'd probably be what I choose. That's not a world I want to live in, though. I love paint. I love having lots of paints. I love using lots of different paints. I enjoy it. You know, some people paint with like an artist palette. They use like heavy body acrylics and they use like 5 colors. Hey, more power to them. That's what you enjoy and you like mixing all your own stuff. Do that. Nothing wrong either way. You don't need to do either one. You need to do the thing that suits your style and you have fun with. Okay. David says, when painting Nurgle rotting flesh, would you start with a normal flesh tone and glaze with greens and purples to get a rotting look, or start with gray or green flesh first? Sure. Yes. Doesn't matter. You could do either. I have a video on painting multiple kinds of dead and putrid flesh. I would recommend you go watch that for the detailed answer. It's literally called, I think, How to Paint Dead and Putrid Flesh. You know, one of the things you probably want to do from the beginning is work some green tones into your skin tone to make it more pallid. Grays can also help to sap the life out of it. You purple in your low tone as your shade is absolutely correct. You want the shadows to be a bit exaggerated. You want them to have that more bruised purple feeling. But you can do all that. You could do all that with glazes. You can do that with initial mixes. The answer doesn't really matter. The finished product, you'll get to the same destination. You can take different roads to get there. But yeah, either one would work. Okay. So Dark Dust says, hey, Vince, I'm thinking of doing tanned skin Slaanesh demons with gold tattoos. I wouldn't recommend that. That's not going to work. It will not work. I don't know what's in your head exactly, but it probably won't work. If you're anywhere in the color palette that I'm thinking you're in. Okay, so let's talk about tanned skin. Tanned skin its true color is orange. Gold's true color is ochre yellow, right? Yellow, if we had to be simple about it. Those two are way too close. Like, one will not stand out from the other. The reason tattoos work on flesh is because, like, one of the reasons tattoos often look so good on flesh, on models, is because tattoo ink has a bluish hue and a desaturated blue hue, and skin is a desaturated orange, Caucasian skin. All skin really has a bit of orange in it. It's just a question of how you mix other colors. But traditional Caucasian skin, like if you buy a Caucasian flesh set, is orange based. Okay. So when you put the blue and orange together, you have a very desaturated orange being complemented by a very desaturated blue. There's an innate, your brain goes, ah, ha, ha, I like that complementary interaction. Gold tattoos would work if your skin was like drow black, right? You would need something to pop it off against. It could also work on like sort of a very deep African brown. Something like that could certainly could work against gold. But my point being, you would need to be like extremely complementary with it, because tattoos need to stand out from the skin around them. So my best advice would be, if you want to do tattoos, choose a different color. If you're going to do like a deeply tanned skin, you want something like, tanned skin is just the introduction of sepia into the orange, nothing more than that. So, you know, you want something that's going to complement it. And if you're going to go like super, super duper tan, like sort of Mediterranean kind of thing, like, then you could make your tattoos brighter as a way to stand out. But they would need to be, you know, in like some very, you could go for like some kind of very bright blue or something if you were going like real tanned. But that's my basic thought on tattoos and what you would want to do there. Would I recommend the Scale 75 flesh set? Yeah, always. It's great for skin tones. I love it. There are many great sets you can use, but it is one of my favorites. I actually usually mix the Scale 75 set with various war colors because I like war colors highlights. They're Flesh 1 and Flesh 2, and I really, really love their Flesh 5 as a shadow flesh color. So there you go. Christina says, what kind of inks do you recommend? Many of them. Depends on what you're at in your ink journey. Your first set of inks you would buy, if you're asking me that, would be Vallejo Game Ink. It's just a simple purchase. They're very matte. They're very pigment dense. They're very easy to use. You don't need to know a lot to use them. You can just use them. They work straight through your airbrush fine. You can mix them into paints to create more rich colors. They have all the great, wonderful purposes of inks. Beyond that, I like the Daler-Rowney FW inks. I mean, these get used by me all the freaking time. Payne's Gray and White being two amazingly good inks I recommend that everybody should own. Their Sepia or Burnt Umber is also a really, really good brown, but their entire range is quite worth it, and I use a lot of them frequently. Scale 75 Inktense set is very nice. Their Inktense wood is absolutely incredible. The black has a nice gloss to it. Can be used for wonderful, really, really deep black shadows where it's not going to be exposed to light because glossy black looks darker than matte black. Their green, like Intensity green, I use quite frequently to do like the low tone on oxidation, mixing it in with Nilic and stuff like that. And the reds and yellows are great for just pumping up and increasing the pigment density in those two colors and the sort of brightness of them. So any of those would be good. Danny says, can you remember what the first miniature you painted was and how old were you when you first picked up a paintbrush? I can tell you how old I was. I was in my first year of college. So I don't know if I was, well, I guess I can't say exactly. I don't know if I was 17 still or had just turned 18. But somewhere around that period is where I started playing Warhammer. So this would have been like late 97, early 98. Like, I don't remember exactly where it happened. I know where I lived at the time. I remember the first game I ever played, which was a game of Warhammer where I was using a bunch of like Battle Masters Empire Knights against my friends Chaos Knights on our like living room floor. I don't know what miniatures I ended up painting. Probably some of those Empire Knights were some of the first ones. I do still own all those original Empire Battle Masters Knights. They're on my shelf in the other room. I keep them as a memento, but I can't say for sure if they're like the first thing I painted. The first unit I ever completed, where I did like a whole unit, was a unit of Plague Monks. Once I got my Skaven army, once I sort of got rid of my secondhand Empire stuff that I had cobbled together. I didn't get rid of it once I sort of put it to the side. And that unit of Plague Monks I still have. It's still in my Skaven army. It's up there in my Skaven army. And I'll, never get rid of it. It's sentimental because I did, 30 of a thing. And I was like, wow, this is what it feels like to have a whole unit painted. It was a real high watermark in my early career. I keep in mind I had painted a little before that because like I took some art in high school. Like I wouldn't say I have any formal art training. I took art class because it was fun. Most of my stuff wasn't doing painting or learning anything that would help me in miniature painting. It was more just like making ashtrays out of clay and stuff like that. What you standard, like the standard experience you have if you do art in high school, right? How far into your painting journey did you develop your own style? I don't know. What day is it today? It's not a thing I ever thought about. It's just a thing that's happened and it still changes, right? It's a constantly evolving thing. That being said, I do think there are some hallmarks of the way I paint now. It's like asking, at what point did you feel old? I mean, you could probably think of like some moment where you recognized it, but you probably felt like it slowly before that, right? Or at what point were you no longer a child? My point is it's a transitional thing. So at minimum, a couple years into it, but everybody probably has their own speed with that. And it depends on the amount you paint, how much you're willing to experiment. All sorts of different factors come into that. But, I think there probably is something to my style, both in like the colors I use and the way I highlight. Though I do like to try to push outside of my boundaries. And I do enjoy trying new things and still constantly experimenting. So I think there's always an evolution there. That all sounds very self-indulgent. Michael Anderson, Reaper uses tinted plastic for their translucent minis instead of clear plastic. My preference. What is the best approach to tinted translucent if you want to maintain a translucent look? Sure. So this is a pretty common question. Like, how do you paint translucent miniatures and keep them translucent? Sure. The answer is, I had it right in front of me. Gloss varnish. What you need is a surface paint will adhere to, so you can't prime it. So you varnish it. Varnish will stick to that plastic. You just varnish the mini, and then you can use like satin varnish if you don't want it to be glossy or thick or whatever. But then you use inks and washes and stuff like that. Usually applied through an airbrush is the best way to go because you can sort of set the direction and you can keep shadows working in certain ways. You want to stay away from anything white. You want to stay in pure inks, very translucent inks. Inks are pigment rich and dense, but translucent, and they will stick to the varnish. And so then you can start doing neat things with the colors. So there you go. Now, because they're already tinted, you've got to work in whatever color scheme they already have, right? So if they tinted it green, you need to understand how that's going to affect any ink you put over top of it and work accordingly, right? Okay. Lawson says, even when I prime lightly with an airbrush and attempt to paint in thin coats, texture builds up on the model by the time I'm done. That's unusual and shouldn't be happening because I've put 100 coats of paint on something and had no texture, even with thick paints. So there's a couple things that are going on here. Like, let's unpack why that's happening, Lawson. One, is it incredibly, like dry where you're painting? Are you using a wet palette? Are you keeping paint in your brush for a long time? In other words, one of the most common things I see, especially newer painters do, is they'll get some paint and they'll just keep doing this. And they'll just keep pushing and they'll keep painting and they'll be like, I can't go back to my palette. I want to get every little morsel of paint out of this. All that means is you're putting dry, thick paint on your miniature. If you watch any really high-end painter paint, watch how often they go back to the palette, how often they're wetting their brush, right? It's usually fairly often. You'll see people just like touch the paint and just like work a tiny space here and then go back and then, touch a wet paper towel and then go back to the paint and then touch a space here. That's keeping it thin and flowing. The other option is you could try some additives, try some flow aid or add some additional thinner medium, but that shouldn't be happening. Like, you should be able to throw, honestly, you should be able to throw like 10 coats of more or less unthinned but smooth paint down on something, like assuming there's at least water in your brush and so on, without it causing any texture to happen. So it's either the environment you're in or the way that you're painting that's causing it to happen. Or it could be the paint you're using. I don't know. Like, there's, if your paint is like old and dry to some degree, if like your paint has dried out some, that could be influencing it. There's lots of weird things that can happen to cause texture in paint, but my best advice would be to try some of those things, and hopefully that helps. Okay. Lloyd asks, how would you paint the ultra symbol on the inside of the cloak? Ultra symbol on the inside of the cloak. Like, you're saying that is it hidden away from view? Is that the challenge? Like, you mean you put the cloak on the Space Marine already or something, and there's like a U underneath, like against his legs? Well, you're in big trouble there. There's not an easy way to do that because if the model's near it, a sub-assembly would have been the right answer. That would have been my advice. So, if you've ever got like with cloaks and stuff like that, if you have inside hidden detail, it's just always better to work in sub-assemblies. If you mean like it's just kind of recessed and you want to know how you would shadow it, the ultra symbols tend to be sort of white or gray, so I would just use a slightly more shadowed gray than whatever your similar color is up on the top side, if that helps. And if I didn't answer your question, Lloyd, feel free to give me some more detail. All right. Kelthar, I'm thinking of picking up the Badger Ghost Tint set. In your experiences, do they have a lot of uses beyond obvious ones like colored metals, etc.? Maybe. Depends on what you're doing. colored metals is like their most common thing that they're used for. You can use them as a glaze, but I prefer, honestly, inks. There's the Badger Ghost tints have a sort of shellac to them that can sometimes be a bit strange to work with. I've had better luck just using like inks in the same capacity. I think that the Badger set is the most useful for things like colored metallics. I think that would probably be their main purpose. If you were looking for something like that, I would honestly, if I had to give my brutal advice, go back to the ink conversation I had earlier, and that would be your better pickup. Much more useful overall. On Marneus Calgar. Oh, an ultramarine symbol under his cloak. I'll have to look at Marneus and figure out where that is. But like I said, sub-assemblies are probably your right answer. Marneus, there he is. Okay, let's take a look at him. Is there a symbol inside there? I don't see it. Well, I'd say it's pretty darn hidden away. Because I'm looking at the new version of him in the art, and I can't really see it inside his cloak. So my guess is don't. Yeah, I don't know where it is. So yeah, you could probably have I can't see it in any of the pictures. I'm not looking at the back of him. If it's on the back of his cloak, I would say just paint it. But there you go. That's my thought. If you just can't see it, I'm not sure it matters. Yeah. All right. Edson, hey Vince, do you have any tips for painting wood grain on a gun stock? Yeah, sure. Alternate ivory and sort of a deep blue, using a little bit of ink in both cases, a little bit of white ink in a bone will do that. Use some flow improver, draw some thin lines. Don't make them straight lines, make them uneven, have like a knot in there. In other words, you want like one to go here and become thin and one to come up and one to cross. Like they need to look very non-regular. Nature is random. And so make them organic, draw them out of ivory in a deep, like a deep blue black. Like I would just use Payne's gray ink, honestly. And then just run the whole thing over with some intensity wood, or if you don't have that, like some sepia tone, like some Seraphim sepia. And then, apply a couple layers of that ink or wash, and you will get wood just like that. That's my best advice. You need to make sure the white is pretty bone colored. Otherwise, it'll look strange because everything needs to snap together into that brown tone. Maroc. Hey, Maroc. Is there any advice you might have for painting massive pieces of terrain that may make life easier? Giant brushes. That's a good starting piece. I have other giant brushes in here down for that. An airbrush, obviously. Craft paints. Don't waste your good miniature paints. Use inks everywhere you can, because you can often get a lot of tone and tint and work out of that through your airbrush. Because you can just kind of step back and fire away with some pretty strong ink, and it'll sort of cover a lot of the area and create nice, sort of tonal variance over the whole thing. Yeah. Pigment. Scatter some pigment around in lots of ways. That'll give it a nice look. Makes it feel very outdoorsy and dry. And you can use like a little bit of raw pigment, goes like an insanely long way. You can just smash it around with a big brush and achieve all sorts of fun stuff. Red Wizard, I have trouble filling gaps and seam lines. I've tried liquid green stuff and matte varnish, but sometimes they still end up visible. Any tip? It's a tough challenge, man. It always is. Yeah, sure. Here's a couple more thoughts. You can always, don't be afraid to like prime and then sand and then reprime. That can be a fun way to go. Don't be afraid to prime and then varnish and then prime again. If you have a glass bottle that you can use that's sort of extra, or you can just go buy some like Tamiya plastic paint, because they come, or plastic glue, because it comes in a glass bottle. But if you have a little tiny glass bottle, you can take like a bunch of sprue trimmings, like cut your extra sprue bits and stuff like that real small, and you can just drop it into your into a small amount of plastic glue. Like you'll have to work with the ratio. It should be about like, 1-to-1 with the bit scrapings or sprue scrapings with the plastic cement. And you'll get like a nice plastic slurry because the plastic glue will melt it and it will just stay in this like weird slurry form. And then you can like, that's why it's got to be in glass, by the way, because this will get really super crazy messy and it's obviously toxic because it's plastic glue, it's chemical. But you can then just take it out of there with like an old garbage brush or the back end of a brush or something and use it as like a filler putty because it's still partially plastic glue. It will melt and sink and combine with the plastic and can actually be a really good trick for just instantly sealing up something like that. So there you go. Hopefully that helps. All right. William Hale, where is a good place to get paints from? The local game store sells only Citadel, and Hobby Lobby only has the World War II colors from Vallejo. Amazon, online, Michigan Toy Soldier, competition minis, all that stuff. Those are my 3 go-to places. Most everything I get as far as paint, I order from either Amazon, Michigan Toy Soldier, or competition minis. All 3 of which are, Amazon's Amazon, but Michigan Toy Soldier and competition minis are both awesome places run by really nice people. So who will be more than happy to help you out to find what you need. Michigan Toy Soldier has a really nice range of a bunch of different stuff, and competition minis is run by just an absolute hobby hero who runs a fantastic local store, and he and his wife really do a great job of taking care of the wargaming and miniature painting community. So I couldn't recommend competition minis more. So there you go. HL17. Is there any tip to avoid flood and leave a blob of ink paint when you try to shade? I try to do your trick to make distressed leather, but often leave a mess. Are you wicking your paint off into a paper towel? Because you need to be wicking your paint off into a paper towel. Always when you're using thin, watery paints, you do not go from the paint to the model. You wick your paint into a paper towel until it stops spreading. And you only have you repeatedly touch the paper towel until there is nothing left. That is nothing left. Sorry. So it's not going like this. When you touch until it's not spreading it at all. Then the paint is just in the brush and you're good. So that's my best advice. Grimlock. I've watched a lot of videos on painting minis, and some techniques are needlessly complex when you can achieve the same result in an easier way. Why is this? Any tips on simplifying complex techniques? Well, same results is very open to interpretation. So some things just take time, and it's about your goals. So that is to say, you can get often within striking distance in a much simpler fashion. Like that's what a lot of hobby cheating is based on. My entire series is based on that, right? And I try to show people the often simple options for how to get at things. So things like zenithal highlighting and glazes to create instant contrast, right? That's like my simple and sort of go-to example. But that's not the same effect as actually constructing careful highlights and reinforcing shadows. But yeah, everything can often be scaled down, especially as you start combining techniques. I mean, that's a very broad question you're asking there, right? Like, if things seem too complex, how do you make them more simple? Well, geez, man, I'm not sure we have enough time here to do that, right? But yeah, the answer is they're not really the same. Like, that is to say, sometimes people overcomplicate things. I don't disagree with that premise. Like, often, but as I said, the series is dedicated to sometimes you can achieve the same thing in a lot less time. People just make things too complicated. So a great example to me is like one of the reasons I don't really layer paint much is because I think that's overcomplicated and time consuming. Like wet blending and then doing a little glazing either with a brush or an airbrush can achieve far smoother, better results a lot faster. Right? So that's a good example of like, there's a simple thing that you will not only achieve equal, but probably better results than sitting there and doing 1,000 layers. People talk about applying white thinly. No, like you can avoid chalky white by using the right whites, namely like white ink and heavy body acrylic whites. You mix those two together, you'll get a smooth white, and I can turn something white like that. I don't need 50 layers. I need one, right? So like it's sometimes it can be the tool, sometimes it can be the product, sometimes it can be the technique. But I mean, sometimes the person just may be comfortable with that style, right? Why do we all do the things we do in our lives that are probably more complicated than they need to be? I suspect if we all step back and we're, critical of ourselves in our own lives, there are many things we do on a daily basis that are too complex, that we could simplify and make our lives more efficient. I doubt any of us are applying the lean methodology to our life every day, but we do it because we're comfortable with it and it's predictable results. So there you go. All right. As usual, these things often get philosophical. It's just the nature of it. Can't avoid it. Miniature painting is philosophy. All right. Abraxas. I love it every time I see your name come up, buddy. Makes me laugh. Abraxas. All right. Hey, Vince, I was wondering, what are your top 3 or 5 building tools? Files, glue, putty, any name brand you like. Oh, sure. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah, we can do that. That's great. Yeah, so I'll talk about this first. This is the knife that I use. I use a surgeon's tool as opposed to the like roundy things. I like this better. It feels more controllable. Like I use a surgeon's scalpel, and I use medical grade steel surgeon's blades as well. They are razor sharp when you buy them, and you can get them in cases of a couple thousand for the same price as you normally get like 10 in a hobby store. They are a better product because they're surgical steel meant to be used for, like, you go out and you purposely find the ones that hospitals use. And so it's not a specific name brand, but I mean, that's my knife. My wet palette is this thing, which is the Redgrass Games wet palette. It is expensive. It is worth every penny. I love this wet palette to death. It's freaking amazing. I'm going to buy the small one as well because I can travel with it. Like, the paper works. It wets everything exactly right. The sponge is amazing. It doesn't get stinky. I've had no smell issues, no mold, no nothing. The antimicrobial nature is perfect. It can both seal tight without, like, very, very tight without an issue. Glue wise, there are 2 sorts of glues I really like. So for my plastic glue, I use this one, which I think you can only get, like, there's not many stores around here that carry it. I just order mine from Europe. So that's the Revel Contacta Professional. I don't know. This is really good plastic glue. I've never had a problem with it. It clogs like not at all. It's so easy to use. It's so smooth. That's my go-to plastic glue. Loctite, super glue, ultra gel control. This is that's your metal minis, or something that isn't, or resin or something like that. That's that go-to. For just regular super glue, whenever I need it for like basing stuff, I just use Zap-A-Gap. Who cares? The most important part is the accelerator for that. Let's see. I'm trying to think of other like hobby related tools. I think that's probably about most of the stuff in just like the actual pure tools area that's not like a paint or anything like that. All my paints are held in nail polish racks. I just go on Amazon and find them. Some are like step racks. So like this is my working, right next to my desk here. I have my working rack. This is where I keep all the paints I'm currently working with, so they're not scattered around my desk. And then on the walls around me, I have like big giant nail polish racks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 of them at the moment, plus stack racks, to hold all the paint. There you go. That's some stuff. Alexander, what are the top products beginners should have? Oh wow, we got a lot of questions. I need to step up my speed here. Okay, top products beginners should have. Things I just mentioned are all helpful. You should have some crappy brushes that you can mess up, and you should have a few very nice brushes, some Winsor & Newtons or some Raphael 8404s or something that you use rarely, but you use to do detail and fine elements. You should have a good selection of paints that you're comfortable with. You don't need all of them in the world, but just a nice selection of paints. You should have probably, like, I would recommend something to clean your brushes with. So you want to get some brush cleaner right away. A good knife, a good set of like tweezers to manipulate small parts. A good set of clippers is absolutely essential. for a beginner. Find something that's nice and that's going to last. These are my like stock heavy clippers, and then these are my nippers, which I use to cut away very fine pieces. So this is one of the Tamiya sets. I like these little nippers. They are razor sharp. This is the CS2. So if you're curious, I really love these. And this is just, some like industrial set. Again, they're both the spring and they both have lay flat edges. So that's all very useful. Beyond that, I don't know. Not much else is like really truly essential. Your next purchases would be like a wet palette or an airbrush. Can expand into things like inks, all that sort of stuff. Different basing things. But, for the most part, you can kind of get by with just like making grit and stuff like that and some tufts. Hopefully that helps. All right. Mikey, in your travels through the paint marketplace, have you ever tried Createx acrylic paints? I have not. I don't know anything about them, but if I do try them, I'll make a recommendation. Ice Axe, how do you organize your Daler-Rowney FW inks? I find the bottles are too big for any of my paint racks. I have a rack for them. You need to go buy a spice rack instead of a nail polish rack. That's the key. So their spice racks, they make plastic tiered spice racks, just like nail polish racks that hang on the wall, but they're like 2 inches deep. So that's how I organize them. And if you're asking specifically, I organize them, of course, in a Roy G. Biv rainbow with the blacks, whites, and browns on the bottom shelf. So there you go. All right. Yes, indeed. It is indeed that is indeed the case, Mikey. That is this year. How many hours at minimum would you recommend beginners start painting per week? You're strapped for time and having trouble organize your schedule so you can progress fast. Well, you will progress fast at the beginning. Fast at the beginning, no matter what, as long as you're like painting. Because there's the gap between knowing nothing and knowing something is pretty big, right? Like it's a sort of like exponential type of gradient. But how often should you paint? A couple hours a week. It's fine. Sit down for a couple hours. Make yourself Uncle Adam had an awesome tip a couple of weeks back I really liked about using your phone and scheduling time in advance and setting an alarm for that time. Say, I will do an hour on this day, set an alarm on your phone, and then go do it. But yeah, a couple hours a week and you can really get going. I mean, if you've got the luxury, more is never bad. But if you're just starting out, a couple hours a week, keeping a dedicated hobby space where your stuff is set up and ready and you can sit down and within 30 seconds be painting is critically important to that. Right. But yeah, a couple, like if you do 3 to 5 hours a week, you'll progress quite fast, especially at the beginning. All right. All right. Could you explain the differences between inks and washes? I have a whole video on this, so I would recommend, first of all, for all of the detail, go watch that. Like I break down all of the different inks and washes out there on the market and talk about the differences, but sure. Washes are meant to flow into recesses. That means they have a lot of things like additives like flow improver in them. They also tend to have a little bit of retardant medium, so they dry slower. They are not very pigment rich. They are meant to be thin. They are meant to be extremely transparent. They are light on pigment because the pigment is meant to flow together and collect in the resources. They will also, because of this, because they are so pigment light and so medium and flow improver and additive heavy, they will tend to do what we call coffee stain large flat spaces. Coffee staining happens because the pigment is dispersed unevenly across a large flat surface. You do not notice when it is in a recess, but you often get this like burnt look across large flats, and that's because washes are not meant to go across large flats. An ink is an extremely pigment dense mixture that's mostly, medium and pigment, and it's meant to be extremely transparent while being also pigment dense. It doesn't have the same properties. It's meant to be applied more evenly and to universally tint a color that it's put over the top of. So, applications and uses, hopefully that's wrapped up in what I just said, but, you use an ink to smooth something out, to intensify a color because you're adding additional pigment to it. So like if you want a brighter red, take your red paint, add bright red ink. That gives you a brighter red. Ink is meant to do things like glazing a lot easier. Washes are meant to do just that. They're meant to get in recesses and create deep shadow. That's it. I mean, they can also be used for like very light tinting and stuff like that too, but that's their purpose. Okay, HL17. When I use acrylic metallic paint with a brush, the metal flake just moves around, not fully covering the surface. Go get yourself some Vallejo metal color. That will stop happening. There you go. And yes, you're seeing that, and that's happening because you're using a metal paint where the pigments are too large and it's in a jelly medium because that's what they have to do. They use a jelly medium because metal pigment is so heavy, it wants to sink. To prevent it from separating and becoming a just ruined mess, miniature companies will use this jelly medium. That jelly medium sucks when you combine it with big, giant metal pigment. Go buy Vallejo metal color. They do neither of those things. They have ultra fine pigment. They use a completely different medium, and you will not see that. That won't happen. So there you go. This is Vallejo metal color. This, not model air, not game air, not model color, not game color, not any of those things. This and this only. I do not use other metal paints. Okay. That's very funny. The next question was literally about Vallejo metal colors. What Vallejo metal colors do you recommend to start out with? Steel and silver, and then pick some mid-tone you like. I like dark aluminum or burnt iron, but you can pick anything like that. That's where you would start, and then golden copper. From there, pick some of the other tones that are interesting. Any to avoid. I think white aluminum's pretty dumb and pointless. It's just a dull, bright white. but it doesn't actually like shine very well. It's cool if you want to do a very select set of purposes. Dull aluminum for the same reason. It's pretty boring and awful. Semi-matte aluminum. You notice a trend here, right? But like everything else, I'm looking literally at my Vallejo metal color right now, and every other one of them has a bunch of like, mess around the top where I've used it a ton. Those are the ones that are basically untouched that I've used a few times and went, nah. So there you go. All right. Have you tried using CA glue and baking soda as a gap filler? You can sand it down after. I have not tried that. I heard that. I know a lot of people do it. It seems pretty cool. I'll have to give that a try sometime. And yeah, like you can. I've heard that you can sand that. And that's a nice advantage because you're basically making a 2-part epoxy is what you're doing there. It's like the poorest man's 2-part epoxy, but that's what's happening there. Have you ever messed with Tamiya panel liner accent? I've been curious how it compares to oil wash, like whether oil washes behave differently or have benefits beside controlling consistency yourself. I have not. I'll have to give that a shot. I do have a store that has the Tamiya range, so I'll have to check that out. But I use oil washes a lot. I mean, the advantage to oil washes is the oil isn't water, and so sounds so stupid. But like water has surface tension. That's why you have to use things like Flow Improver to get it to go into recesses and to flow down and gather. Oil isn't like that. Oil's friction coefficient is very, very low. And as a result, when you touch something with an oil wash, it will tend to just go zoop and flow to the lowest point and fill panels. That's why, traditional scale modelers used oil washes a lot as pin washes because you can just get some oil wash and touch a pin and it will just touch the pin at the point of your brush, or a little pin to the crack in a panel, and it'll just go whoop and fill the whole thing. That's because it's got such a low friction coefficient and has very little surface tension, unlike water, right? I mean, we all did the trick in school where you took like a penny and you dripped a little water on top of it and you could make a little concave bubble. That's why acrylic paint sucks at filling in things like that, and why you use tons of Flow Improver to make that happen. But no, there you go. I haven't tried it. Sounds interesting though. All right. Boom, 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 boom. Oh, there you go. We'll answer that one. Oh, neat. I'll have to try this, the panel liner from Tamiya. A lot of people are talking pretty highly of it. I do like that pun, Grimlock. That's a solid pun. All right. Matthew Phillips, when I zenithal highlight a unit that is going to be white, I feel like I don't have much to do after the highlight. Am I wrong, or does that process kind of create the white you need? As long as your low tone is a color. So like when I'm doing white units, I mean, so next week you'll see a video on how I did the Death Guard I shared today. And you'll see the steps I go through to very carefully control the shadows. You're right. Getting to white at the highest highlight with your Zenithal, you could be done. But the key with painting white is controlling the shadows, and they need to be very soft and subtle, and most importantly, toned to your overall color palette lightly. So, like, do you want a cold white? Do you want a sickly green white? Do you want a warm white? And so you need to very carefully control what your shadows look like on that white to make the white actually stand out and look appropriate. So that's actually most of what I'm doing when I'm working post Zenithal on something that's meant to be white, is trying to get like the shadow to have the right, very subtle and soft, but temperature correct blend. Have you ever played with Turbo Dork's metal and color shift colors? I have not. I have not tried them. I saw them around, but I didn't get a chance to pick any up yet. Oh, nice. Miniature Market. Yeah, it's another great recommendation. I should have mentioned Miniature Market. Yes, that is a good one. They mentioned they have decent Vallejo stuff. Absolutely right. FS. Hey, Vince, you spend so much time sitting in a chair. I like this chair very much. Although this is actually the second one of these I've had. Because the other one just eventually dies. All my chairs die eventually because I do spend a lot of time in them. What features should a chair offer for painting over a long time? Soft arm support, lumbar support. So like I have a little lumbar pillow right here. So my back, so I'm forced to sit like this. I have one right here as well, to keep me even. So like when I'm sitting here, you know, my back is forced to be quite upright. You don't want to sit in anything that's going to make your back do this. You want to sit in something that makes your back do that. Otherwise you will get a bad back. I used to paint in this terrible chair right here. That's become like my secondary airbrush chair. My airbrush booth is over here. My guest chair here. I painted in this thing for years and it was literally destroying my back. And I went to the chiropractor and they said, get a better chair. And I did. And all of a sudden my problems went away. So there you go. So it's worth spending the money on, is what I'll say. I mean, this chair is meant for gaming. Obviously it's like a gaming chair. It has a little thing that you can it has a little massagey thing you can plug in and do, but I don't ever do that. I find that to be a bit extraneous. But this chair was probably, I don't know, $200 on Amazon, and it's the best investment I've ever made. I would have happily sacrificed not buying an army to have a better chair, because I find painting much more pleasurable since I got a good chair and that I can sit in comfortably. I spend 100 hours a week in this chair. So it's probably fairly important that I'm comfortable in it. If you calculate out the cost per time, it's the best deal or the best thing I've ever purchased. Right. So there's my advice. Okay. On speeding up my painting versus sketching and underpainting, I find that by repeatedly glazing on top of the sketch, I lose shadows and have to repaint them. Might as well have wet blended on the primer help. Well, one, use thinner layers. Two, be careful how much you work, because if you're glazing and losing a shadow, your paint's way too thick, because a glaze should never touch or move a shadow at all. Period. If your glaze is moving a shadow color or hiding a shadow color, your glaze is too thick. It's not a glaze. You're doing a layer. Now that being said, there's no reason you can't Zenithal and value sketch it quickly and then wet blend on top of it. It still is advantageous. So go watch how Banshee does his stuff. Banshee does a quick Zenithal, then he does a value sketch over top, like a messy value sketch over top to get the idea of the thing. And then he just puts pretty thick repeated layers of wet paint on top and wet blends it out. Now that's still being helped, because if that was a miniature that was completely primed black, it would change the value of the paints above, even if the layers are fairly thick, because all paint is somewhat translucent. So there's no reason you should avoid doing that. It's perfectly fine. Wet blending on top of that, yeah, cool, man. Go for it. I do that quite a lot, especially when I want to go with something that's in a completely different sort of temperature range than how I Zenithal, then it's some small area of the miniature. So I will use thicker paint and kind of purposely, intentionally shift those things around. That's no problem. It's perfectly fair. It's still advantageous to do like a zenithal or a value, just be quicker about it. You don't need to worry about being clean because you're not trying to use the full view of the lighter paint underneath shining through. You're trying to use like sort of the very subtle light that it's providing up into the layers. So you could just like, you can make your value sketch quick dry brush and nobody's going to notice if you're using thicker paint wet blended. But yeah, don't hesitate on that at all. Perfectly fine. Okay. Skunk 12. If I want something white, I paint it white. Yeah, that's right. No nonsense. That's right. Okay. All right. Okay. If you had to paint one Age of Sigmar army for the rest of your life on a deserted island, what would it be? The new Slaanesh range. Easy answer. Easy answer. I don't even know completely what's in that realm or what's in that army, and I can guarantee you that's what I would do. How many years do I have to paint in order to get quicker? 0 years. You just have to make that your focus, and what you do is part of deliberate practice, right? Painting isn't about practice. Everybody says that. Just practice, practice, practice. That is a lie. If you practice mindlessly, you will never get better. You can plow thousands of hours into it and still not be any better or closer to what you were trying to achieve. Deliberate practice is the key. You know, Ben Cantor is a good guy and he's a great painter, and he wanted to get better at busts. So he bought 40 busts and over the next 6 months painted all 40 of those busts. That's deliberate practice, right? You want to get faster? Try to paint faster and then reevaluate. Set yourself to a schedule. Put your phone down and put a clock on. Count down from 2 hours. Give yourself that amount of time and keep doing that. Go research, tricks and cheats to paint quicker to a higher quality, right? Those kinds of things. So like you have to focus your efforts toward a thing. Deliberate practice, deliberate practice, deliberate practice. That's how you get better at more or less anything in life. All right. What do you use to protect your models after painting them? Only one thing. If I varnish them, there is only one thing I varnish them with, and that is AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish. The only varnish I use now. Tester's Dull Coat is fine as a secondary, but it's gross and stinky and you have to walk outside and it can sometimes fuzz. I've had no problem with that Ultra Matte Varnish and I love it to death. It will take a couple of coats to protect as well as some other things because it is rather thin, but it works just fine. What shades did you recommend for mid turquoise like in Celestial Vindicator armor? I usually use like Despair Green from Scale 75 Fantasy and Games range. I find to be a nice low tone, and then honestly with tiny amounts of Payne's Gray ink mixed in. So there you go. If I want to paint display instead of tabletop quality, what ballpark time should I be looking at? Well, that's a long question. What are you trying to do? I mean, I guess is my answer. Everything has its own time frame. If you try, like, I understand you said, well, Vince, I just told you I'm trying to paint display quality. Well, the first question you should ask yourself is, can you paint display quality yet? I don't know the answer to that. That takes an amount of practice in itself. So deliberately practice to do that. How long is it going to take you? A long time. Like it's going to take a while, but you'll get better at that the more you do it. You can paint a display quality thing faster the more you attempt to paint to a very high level and understand how to reach that. Like I try to paint most of my armies to a display quality, but that's below competition quality. The Primaris Lieutenant or Captain, sorry, I did recently was, I don't know, 90 hours, 100 hours on that guy. I don't think I could do every Space Marine in an army that way. That would probably get ridiculous, but a unit is 40 to 60 hours generally, whatever that boils down to. If you want to paint to that like level of quality, right? But again, that's a thing that you could be slower or faster with depending on what you're doing. My basic advice would be not to worry about the time. What you really need to do is get time out of your head and paint to a standard rather than to a time. Something can either be locked by time or locked by quality, but it can't be locked by both. So either you say, I'm going to paint for sort of this amount of time or until I'm happy and call it a day, which I'm happy is usually means I'm done often. Or you say, I'm going to keep working on this until it's as good as I can do. That doesn't mean perfect. There's no such thing. No one has ever painted a perfect miniature. Not one person, not ever. It doesn't exist, period, end of story. Whenever I hear somebody say, I want to make something perfect, my advice is, well, you failed. I don't know what you did, but you failed. Congratulations. You didn't do it. No one's done it. No one's done it ever. Not one person anywhere in the world at any point in time has ever done it. Such a thing does not exist. You should be always aiming to do the best you can do and to be improving over whatever the last thing you painted was, if that's what you're trying to get at. But display quality effectively means, you're trying to go to a super high clean quality. So that's what you should aim for. But a long time is the answer. All right, Kelly. It was very nice to meet you too, sir. Would you mind putting these live hobby chat Q&As on a separate playlist? Sure. I need to go back in and alter some. I need to make up some new playlists anyways. Maybe I'll try to get to that this week because I want to make learning tracks out of the hobby cheating playlist. At this point, it's so large that it's hard for people to find stuff in. And so I want to make some learning tracks on doing different things. Here's the basing track and that kind of stuff. You mentioned nail polish racks and I've used them, but have you considered a 3D printer and printing your own off? No. I have zero interest in a 3D printer. None at all. That's too much nonsense that I don't have room for. I'm all into it, man. If other people, that house is 3D printed from a very nice friend who was nice enough to print it for me. So I'm all about other people having them. And then I give them money for their thing. That's fair. I'm willing to engage in mercantilism, as it were. But I just have zero interest in owning the thing myself. It seems complicated and you got to do stuff and care. And I'm not into that. I'm into just getting the finished product. That's super good. I don't grow my own food. I don't knit my own clothes. I ain't printing my own stuff. Okay. Nope, I'm good. All right. Noah, as a new painter, how do I tell when my models meet the standards for tournaments? When they have 3 colors on them. The standards for tournaments is low. Just being able to, most tournaments just have a 3-color standard. Now, if you mean to score the full amount on the checklist, go to the tournaments. That is to say, not just physically, but go to their websites and pull the paint checklists. Lots of tournaments publish their paint checklists and kind of look at what they want. But the short answer is if you're giving it the old college try and kind of even if you're doing the simple, new painter common paint shade or paint, wash highlight technique, you're great. That's fantastic. But I think what most tournaments want to see is just people putting some care and paint on their minis. So if you're trying, you're doing the right thing. And nobody's gonna ding you for that. Now you might not get max points on whatever the paint checklist is, but that's okay. That can just be a good learning experience, and you'll see what it is. But my advice would be go out to things like Adepticon and Nova and NashCon and anything else you want. Wapaka and all these people have published their paint checklists, and go take a look. And then just that'll kind of give you an idea. But if you're putting the time and care into it, you're probably doing pretty well. How do you keep your space clean, particularly dust? Oh my God. I don't know, man. If you've got a secret, tell me. Dust is such a problem for me because I keep 3 dogs, 3 golden retrievers, long-haired dogs down here in my office with me every day. And it is a nightmare, an utter unending nightmare. It is purely elbow grease. I ran an air purifier for a long time and it just broke because the filter got so gummed up that even if I changed the filter, it was still it just literally one day popped and exploded. That's on a brand new filter. And then the whole room smelled like burnt plastic for a while. Sweet. So my answer is, I don't know if you can find a good trick. I need some kind of massive HEPA filter running in here constantly. Boom, 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 boom. Have you tried the Artis Opus makeup dry brush? No, I have not tried any of their brushes. So I will leave all commentary on their specific quality to other people who have experienced them. But I will say I buy lots of makeup brushes for for doing dry brushing and have had very positive results with the sort of bulk sets that I bought online. That is what I will say. Okay. Awesome. Paint with Penny using the metal color. Glad to hear it. Throw everything else in the trash. Is GW Leadbelcher a metal color like the Vallejo range? No. Nothing else is. All other metal paints, with the exception of possibly the Scale 75 range, which is like, it's good. It's not great, but it's the only thing that's even close. Everything else should be basically thrown in the bin. There is Vallejo metal color. There is Scale 75. There's Steel range, especially. And then there is like everything else. It's just not even worth discussing. That giant metal paint review will happen sometime. All right. We need to go into lightning round here because I'm over my hour. I just realized we've been answering a lot of questions, but this is great. So I'll try to pick up the pace here, but I do want to make sure I try to get to all of them. Okay. As somebody that is looking to pick up an airbrush for the first time, what are the essentials to get besides the brush, hose, and compressor? I have a video. If you go back to my Just Buy an Airbrush video, I have an entire list of accessories you can get in there. Short answer, not much else. A little portable spray booth is a good answer. Beyond that, probably some like little pipettes. Like there's all sorts of fun little things you can buy. You know, little holders for your airbrush and a little thing to dump your water into and little pipettes to fill them easier. All that's fine. But like compressor, airbrush, hose, spray booth, done. That's everything else is gravy because you can just take out a plastic cup and empty your paint water into that, and that's fine. You know, you don't need a whole bunch of other special tools. But you can have them; they can make your life easier. Sometimes when using Vallejo metal color through my airbrush, it comes out really grainy instead of the smooth coverage it normally has. Is it an airbrush problem? Yes, I would think so. I've never had that happen, so I couldn't say. Could be something else getting stuck up in the airbrush. Could be you're getting some tip dry or something in there. I would make sure you have a couple drops of thinner in there just to keep everything flowing smoothly. Zabier, and I always put the thinner in first, then use a little bit of metal color in there. So a couple drops thinner to some drops of metal color, and I've never had that happen. So maybe that's what's going on. I have a question regarding the way I can make a water base. I mean, a thick layer for a 20 mil base. How do you recommend you hold the liquid? If you really are going to talk about doing it on regular miniatures, then you've got to like, it's a pretty tricky process. Effectively, you want to like, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. It depends on the base specifically, but one of the easier ways is if you have non-beveled bases, like GW style bases are beveled like that, which makes it problematic. But if you have a non-beveled base, you can go buy like cupcake tins that are the exact size of the base. You can force the base down into the cupcake tin. It has to be the exact same size. And then you can just pour it on top. Like you put a little stick down in there or something to like, so you can pop it out. Think like a popsicle. Like you just silicone the edge so that way it doesn't stick. Put a little popsicle stick or, you know, some kind of stick in the middle of your base and then just pour around it, then pop it out. And then you just work your little paper clip or your pin free or something. That can be a good trick. You can use a silicone cupcake mold. That's even easier because the silicone cupcake molds, you can just like invert them and go and literally like pop the thing out. So you don't have to have a little stick in the middle. If you can find that exact size. If you can't find exact size like that, you have to use like putty and sort of like some kind of sealant on the edge. You can use like blue tape or something like that. It's especially on a beveled base, it's tricky as all get out to do real depth. But it's possible. You can do it through things like tack and blue tape if you like hold it all on there and keep it tight, but you're going to have some stuff leak. So you're going to need to scrape sand and gloss varnish. So in the end, doing all those kind of bases is actually more about the fixing at the end. So you scrape it, you sand it, and then you re-gloss varnish over it to smooth it all out. That's usually ends up being the trick. All right, Sam, the color schemes for the Space Marines were devised in the 1980s, like the Ultramarines in the punk era. Nowadays, I feel like some of them look dated. I mean, sure, there's lots of options out there. They always do have some of that 80s scheme to them, but you can also interpret them lots of ways. Like, think about the Ultramarines. Like, there's so many different takes on what Ultramarine blue is and doing it in like a reflective metal versus a standard flat blue with edge highlights. So like it's a very open to interpretation thing. So that's what I'll say. Alexander, thanks for the airbrush tips with Flao thinner. Happy to help. What's your favorite painting technique? I have no idea. I wouldn't even know what to answer. I mean, I use a lot of things very freely and interchangeably at this point. So like I'm often wet blending and then feathering and then doing some glazing on top and on and on. I'm not sure I could pick just one thing. It's all just become a mixed bag. I don't really know where the lines are that separate anymore. I'm not trying to sound like a self-indulgent prick. I just mean that like I don't really think about it when I'm doing it. I just kind of do it because my brain goes, this is what you need to do here, and then I do it. It's become a sort of autonomic response, right? Okay. Let's see. Oh my gosh. Still have so many questions. Okay. What does it take for you to come up to Canada? I mean, I'm sure I'll be up to Canada teaching at some point. Why does everyone say Tester's dull coat is stinky? Because it has an aerosol in it that most people find offensive. But if you find it sweet, hey, isn't that the funny nature of the world that some people like things that other people don't? But it has an accelerant in it that's generally considered to be offensive. It's certainly toxic. I'll say that much for sure. Will you ever do a guide for painting reptile crocodilian style skin to a high detail? It's a good idea. I'll add it to the list. I hadn't thought of it, but sure, I'll put it on the list. That sounds like a fun project. I have a bunch of old Seraphon. Like I have a whole Seraphon army that's literally in a shoebox. It's just all in there. It's all painted back in the 90s, but I've still got it. Boom, boom, boom. Yes, I did put out a new video right now because it was settled. It was set to go live now. What do we define as high quality and display quality painting, and any style and level of painting can be displayed? Who's the final arbiter and why? I don't know. No one, everyone, you, me, the judge of the painting competition. I'm not sure what your question is, Fulcrum. Like, it is what it is, right? What is high quality? Well, it has features I can point to and put a finger on. But in general, it's a certain level of contrast, a certain level of cleanliness, a certain level of composition, of color understanding, of the use of light, of the use of advanced techniques, all sorts of things like that, right? What makes a display quality mini is something that uses all of those fluently and effectively. And what makes a competition mini is something that does all of that to the next level beyond that. It isn't just painted masterfully, it's painted artistically. And is as free of error as something can be, and has something to say, and has narrative in it, and all of that. So like then you can figure out backwards from there. But there's gray lines here. This isn't about like, well, if you check boxes A, B, C, and D, then you've hit display quality, and if you add E and F, then you've hit competition. Like that's not a thing. And this is always sort of a moving thing. But yeah, there you go. How would you feel about being referred to as Advanced Duncan? I would not feel good about that because I don't think that's the case. What Duncan teaches, like Duncan's a very good painter, and what he teaches, he's teaching it often in a simple fashion because that's what people need who are watching the videos. And I'm glad he's out there doing that. I teach different types of stuff because my interests are different, but I would never want to be known as Advanced Duncan. I would be insulting to him, and I have a lot of respect for him. But thank you. It's very nice of you to say, but I just, Okay. How would you go about painting the herdstone from Beasts? Like, I want it to look like it's made out of ice. I want the fire to be reflecting through the whole thing. I'm not sure I can explain that in a few minutes. Your light source is underneath, inside. So ice and crystals are translucent items which gather the shadow at the source of the light, and the light collects opposing the source. So on every angle, you would need to paint a weird transition through icy blue gray to a deep, probably black at the low end, up to an orangey white yellow at the top end. It would be very, very, very complicated, like crazy complicated. If you're ready to spend, dozens of hours on this to make it look right, you're talking about an inverse crystal complex OSL effect. So that's how you do it. You'd make every facet of the thing properly edge highlighted, like you would utilize what I did in the painting Warpstone video, but you would have to flip the whole thing on its head. The shadows would need to be down at the bottom since the light source is coming up from underneath. You'd need to transition through a gray blue to capture the ice, and then get to like white, orange, yellow at the very top where the light has gathered on every facet. Every single face and change of angle would have to act like that. I'll leave that to you whether you think that's a thing you want to try. All right. Let's see. A lot of very funny discussions and answers about airbrushes for cakes. I enjoy all that. How do you paint minis that have weapons across the front of their bodies? I hate them. I absolutely hate them. I like open minis. Open minis means this, right? Open. There's nothing covering anything else. I have clean access to all parts of the mini. That's why I love that Primaris Captain, right? Like this dude. He's very open. Leave the arms off is usually the best answer. Like with all my Snake Girls, I left their arms off and then attached them at the end. It's annoying. But here we are. I don't know. I either that or just accept that like it's going to be harder to paint them. I suppose that's your choice, and you're not going to get it up to as high a quality. It's a question of time you want to invest. I find people that are like this, that are very closed off in their stance, like those types of miniatures, just absolutely infuriating. Okay. What color will you use for the new Slaanesh Demon Prince skin? I use a lot of different colors. Specifically, hold on, I'll grab my paint recipe for you. But there's a lot of different colors. I take photos of my recipes. That's how I do them. I have to go to that. Hold on. Like I just literally take pictures of the paints I use. Okay. So I use Bold Titanium White and Heavy Warm Gray from Pro Acryl, a little bit of magenta, a little bit of black leather, or magenta from Pro Acryl, black leather from Scale 75, Flesh 5 from War Colors, Vampiric Shadow from Reaper, and Miskatonic Gray from Fantasy and Games. Scale 75. There you go. There's probably also just a slight bit of violet in the deepest shadows. Some kind of violet. That's my flesh tone for the Slaanesh skin of my army. Doing Ironjawz and looking for a good secondary armor color to pair with bronze and purple. The base armor is bronze. Well, the base armor is orange, and so bronze reads as orange, and you have purple. So probably a tealish color would be the right thing to pair with that. There's a couple really nice online color wheels. Go there and like select your two colors and select a triadic color scheme and see what pops up. You can either use a split complementary, which groups like this, or a triadic, which groups like that on the wheel, and see what pops up. My guess is, it's just thinking about that off the top of my head, it would be like a teal color, but something like that. Is that a Mage's Staff at the back? Yes, it is. Oh, sure. Like beveled bases that have recesses are good for filling. That's a great point. Let's see. Do you think it would be best to stick with Scale 75 or jump to the new Scale Artist set? Depends on whether or not you want to use heavy body acrylics. They paint in a very, 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 very different way. Go buy a couple heavy body acrylics from like Golden, see how you like them. That'll tell you. Do you do X-Wing? I do not. If I was going to, yes, I would repaint my ships. I've kind of wanted to paint one because I like vehicles and weathering vehicles and stuff. I think that's fun. So I might do one sometime just for the fun of it. But no, I don't play the game and haven't done it yet. Any particular advice you would give to achieving a good white glaze? Don't do it. Don't glaze with whites. Don't try to glaze with whites. It's not going to work well. If you need to quote unquote glaze with a white, do it with your airbrush. Otherwise, paint a nice, strong, solid, clean white, and then glaze the opposite direction. So like whatever you're trying to achieve, I'm trying to go from green to white. Then paint this white strong to here and glaze from here down with your green, your translucent green. Okay. Golden has iridescent metallic colors in their liquid color line. Interesting. Okay. I did try one of them and I didn't love it as much, but okay. Let's see. Oh, there you go. Yeah, somebody mentioned try to colors, go to Adobe's website. Yeah, there are others. Yeah, but that's my best advice. Yeah, there's a lot of like online color wheels. I use them all the time. Like there's a university that has one I use that I really like because you can select your type of scheme, like, you know, sort of a sympathetic scheme, a complementary scheme, a split complementary, quadratic, triadic, and all those will produce different results, and you can lock things and stuff like that. And Chaser said, like, use normal heavy body acrylics for mini painting. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Go buy a couple of these. Golden Artist Colors Heavy Body Acrylics. Okay, this product. Find some colors you like. I would recommend owning this white anyways. Everybody should own heavy body acrylic titanium white. Everybody. This is the most useful, one of the most useful paints I own. Like, how do I get a smooth white? This plus this. This is smooth white. This doesn't go chalky. It's very strong, very bright. Okay. So there you go. But yeah, I have a whole range of them. I use them a lot. I like them. I have all my different, teal colors and stuff. My cobalt teal here, which I really like. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. You can generally, they're going to vary heavily in price because they're real paints, and so like have real pigment in them, and so will vary a lot based on the cost of that pigment. So just be wary of that. Okay. All right. We'll do like one or two. I've gone a little long today, but I'll do like one or two more questions, and then I'm wrapping it up. I've been trying the Warcolor paint range. They seem very transparent. Nope, they are very transparent. They work best over like a zenithal line. They're meant to be more used like that. They work great over white. They work great over zenithal. They are intentionally quite transparent. You're not doing anything wrong. In an older video, you mentioned liking Vallejo liquid gold and silver. I do, but I never use them anymore because as alcohol-based paints, they're so annoying to work with. I've just replaced them with the Vallejo metal color because the shine is almost as good. Like it's slightly not as good, but it's still pretty freaking close. And they're just so much easier to work with. Like I like Vallejo liquid color. Don't get me wrong. It's liquid gold. It's amazing. Like it's like painting with gold flake, but God, is it annoying to work with. All right. So there you go. That's it. That brings us to the end. Oh, okay. Andrew, you get the last question. Here we go. Advice for using and blending fluorescent paints. Currently trying watercolors. Yeah, man. Absolutely. Put them on thick and then blend them out. Paint on the miniature. So all of my Slaanesh is done using fluorescent pink at the highest highlight. I've also used some of this. I really want to make a review on this sometime, but I'm not sure what to say about these. Like, I don't know whether to do a head-to-head product review or not, but I use both of these. What I do is you put them on thick. Like, literally, I will grab a dollop, is the best way I can put it, of that paint, and I will set it onto where I want, and then I will just smooth it down and smooth it down and smooth the edges. It's the best way I've found to paint with fluorescent paints. That gives you that really shock intense color, and then you just work it down. And then usually I'll just come back and glaze something else over the very end of it. So like doing my sort of Slaanesh hair scheme, which runs from this like ultra deep purple, which is Elendil violet from scale 75 up to this like fluorescent pink. It's usually like sketch out those colors very brightly with kind of thick paints. And then I just do a couple glazes to smooth everything out. So there you go. That's what I would say. But I love Warcolors fluorescents. These are amazing. They're so bright. They're so intense. But yeah, you have to you apply them thickly and then kind of push them down. It's my best advice. Okay. So there you go. That's that wraps it up today. Yan, re-ask your question in the comments once the video goes up, and I'll type out a response. If people have questions that I didn't answer or you want more on, feel free to drop those down in the comments. I will always come back and answer those afterward. But as always, I appreciate very much you watching this one. I hope this was informative. I hope this was helpful and gave you stuff to think about. Like I said, we do this once a month. Next month is going to be a weird month. I don't know when it'll happen because I'm gone for a bunch of weeks in the middle of the month for teaching in the UK. Like I said, if you're interested in coming and joining me, Dark Sphere, May 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. And then there's Warhammer Fest the weekend after that, which is why ostensibly why I'm in the UK, but it will happen. We'll get it done. But just, stay posted. I always have to do these just whenever the schedule allows. They're always usually in the middle of the day on Saturdays. Usually in the middle of the month is what I try to aim for. So thank you very much, everybody, for watching. I hope this was super helpful. As always, feel free to ask more questions in the comments. I'll see you next time.